Welcome to the Escaping the Accountant's Trap podcast. It's a podcast to help accountants, CPAs, and bookkeepers escape what we call the accountant's trap. It's where accountants are not getting paid for their value and are forced to work long hours with high demanding clients with little pay. Well, how do you escape the trap? And one way is the topic of today's episode, and that's by ensuring you get the right people on your team by testing them before you hire them. To help me with the discussion, I've invited Giles Pearson, the CEO of Account Test. Giles, welcome to the show.
Hey Adam, nice to talk to you today.
I'm really excited for this episode because I think what you are doing is fascinating. You're essentially ensuring that accountants who are hiring people for their team are making sure that they are getting the right people on the bus, so to speak, by testing them. So, can you tell us how that works?
Yeah, look, and you're spot on, and as we all know, it's super hard to find good talent these days. So
Yeah.
being able to move fast and being able to know the quality of the people that you're taking on is really important. And you might not be able to find the people that exactly the fit that you need, but it's a way better experience for everybody if you know the caliber of the person you're taking on, and you can make that integration into your team much smoother, even if they're not really quite what you want, because you might well not be able to find that. So look, my background was 25 years in public accounting. I was a partner with a large firm here in New Zealand, where I am today. A partner here for 18 years. So hired loads of people through that time. Not all of them worked out, and we went looking for some technical skills tests. That's where that was our focus at the time, and we just couldn't find anything that we thought was at a sort of professional level that we were happy to put in front of a candidate for our firm. So 25 years in public accounting was a lot and enough.
Yeah.
When I'd done that, it was like, here's a little itch that I might want to scratch. So I teamed up with my sort of co-founder Steve Evans and started Account Tests, building some technical skills tests here in New Zealand. Went to Australia, UK, and sort of a couple of years ago to the US. So that's really, I guess, is the why of why we do what we do.
Okay. So why do you suggest accountants test their prospects before hiring them? And what type of tests should they be performing? You mentioned technical, but,
Yeah.
but yeah, what do you suggest?
And look, to answer the first part of that question, and you might have seen the survey that came out last week that said that sort of 85% of candidates who have a college degree lie on their resume. And,
Really?
and yeah, I know. Well, and to be fair, like, who hasn't done that? Um,
Okay.
and
Well,
some of that's exaggeration. So it's, how many people did you manage, or what was your role title, and these sorts of things. So you might say low level, but it makes it really difficult when you're hiring to have any confidence in anything that you actually read. So if you
good point.
if you can at least verify their qualification, you can probably to some extent put a line through everything else and go, well, that's interesting because that's what they're telling me, but how much of that is real?
Yeah.
So then you end up with an interview, which is a fraught process on both parts. Smaller firms in particularly don't necessarily interview very well because they don't interview very often. And I was in
Mm,
that category. I was a poor interviewer. Never had any training on how to interview. Um, there's this concept called competency-based interviewing, which is where you're, specifically interviewing for the competencies that you're looking for. But how many accountants, how many CPAs have actually got training in how to do that in a real life situation? So,
yeah.
um, so the interviewers are often not that great at what they do. and the interviewees, some people perform really well at interview. We've all had the stories, and my kids would be a perfect example. My daughter went to a number of interviews when she went out of college. The first one, she rang up and went. It went terribly. I just went to pieces. I really didn't know what I was doing. By interview 5, she nailed it. She was the same
Wow.
person,
Yeah.
but she now knew the game. She knew the questions she was going to be asked. She had all her stories, and she gets the job 5 interviews later. But same person, and will be as good as at the job, for the 5th employer that she went to interview for as the
Yeah.
first one. So candidates can struggle at interview, or outperform compared to how they're going to achieve in the role.
Yeah.
So then what do you
And
do? At that
yeah.
point, you've got resumes that are should go in the bin, and interviews that give potentially limited insight. So that's where testing comes in, because testing gives you objective evidence. And that's not to say you'd hire somebody only on the testing processes, but it gives you objective insight. So, think technical, you're hiring a staff accountant. You want to know whether they've got the technical skills for that role. You can ask a few questions at interview. They may or may not know the answers to those. Randomly, they may know the answers, but actually they don't know much else. Or, randomly, they don't know the answers to those questions, but actually are pretty good. So, doing like one of our tests, which is 40 questions generally, that's a lot of data points. You're getting quite a bit of insight, and being able to compare them, with a norm group, which is what we create, or versus previous hires if you've used testing before. So you get to really be able to see where they sit on that sort of continuum of experience.
Hey there, Adam here from the Escaping the Accountant's Trap podcast. I'd like to personally invite you to a free masterclass that we're conducting this Thursday called How to Start a CFO Service. To register, just go to thecfoproject.com and click free training at the top. See you then. You're describing the situation with your daughter, how she got the job at 5 interviews. So the opposite could be true. A lot of accountants could be hiring employee or potential employees who are great at interviewing, right? Who gamed the interview, but then just turned out to be lousy employees. They were just great interviews. They knew what to
Yeah.
say. They knew all the right things to say. But this is just sort of another test, another checkpoint to decide if this person knows what they're really talking about.
Well, and if you go online and look at, what are likely interview questions for an accounting position, um, and you've done a couple of interviews already, you get a pretty good idea of the sorts of questions you're going to be
Yeah,
asked. So and to be fair, most interview questions are around, tell me about a time when, and need to describe a scenario. And those are good questions, but equally candidates know they're coming. So they think about the scenario and they can dress it up,
absolutely.
and
Embellish. I
if
mean,
if
it's
if
kind of
eighty five
expected to.
percent of
Right.
if 85% of them lie on their resume, what percentage of people are going to lie
That's
at their
right.
interview? Yeah,
That's right.
probably about the same.
Yeah. And it may not be outright lying. It just may be just dressing it up, like you said, just to make it
Absolutely.
sound a little bit better than what
Yeah,
it actually
yeah.
was.
But as an
Interesting.
employer, you probably can't tell the difference, to be fair, between
Yeah.
somebody who's 100% honest, 75% honest, or 10% honest. It's very difficult.
So the types of questions that you ask, just so we can visualize, what's one example of a question that you might ask on this test?
Think of a really simple one of our simple tests. So we have a test called debits and credits. So
Okay.
the question will be, here's here's an entry that your accounting system has processed. You've bought something, you bought some inventory, and you've received the invoice, and your accounting system, QBO or Xero or whatever, has processed that invoice for you. What's the journal entry that the system will have
Got it.
posted? And
And
giving
they'll
a
create the
variety, obviously, of options for a candidate to choose.
Okay.
So so that test, for example, is it's a short one, 20 questions, but it's all about, prove to me you've got an intuitive understanding of debits and credits. Here's a transaction, tell me what the journal entry is. Here's a journal entry, tell me what the transaction was. So
Interesting.
you're going to get you can really tell the people who know stuff and who don't know stuff at that simple level. It's not very nuanced. So those are the sorts of things we're trying to tease out, I guess, in this process. As the tests go further up the chain, say our CPA public accounting test, the questions obviously get significantly more difficult, and they're inevitably somewhat generalist because firms have all different sorts of roles. So we're trying to create tests that are, if you like, good for the widest number of roles that people are likely to have.
Got it. Okay. So you have the technical side of the tests. Is there anything that tests their sort of personality or culture fit or anything of that nature?
Yeah, look, and so we decided to have a look at that. Obviously, on the skills side, there's really not a lot of options out there for testing skills in public accounting. But in personality, there's obviously a lot of options that people have traditionally used. And, some of them are pretty good and some of them are not so good. And tests that describe your candidate as a color or an animal or something are good for team building, but they're not good for hiring. There's generally not a lot of science behind those tests. That they're good for getting your team to relate to each other and talk about how they work together.
Hmm.
You wouldn't want to hire somebody based on those results. But there are tests, what they call the Big Five personality profiles, which I guess ask a lot more questions and therefore have some science. So we looked at those Big Five ones and thought, look, we can do better for the accounting profession here. So we took a big study that was done actually out of the UK, looking at what do modern accountants need in terms of the qualities that they have to be successful. And we sort of combined that with a Big Five personality profiling and developed our own Big Five version based on these specific qualities for accountants. And that's stuff like, this is not rocket science. It's like relationships, it's like ethics, problem solving, coping with stress. Not vastly different to maybe what other personality profiles would do, but we're looking at it through the lens of public accounting. So, and then when you've got the profile done, you get interview questions based on the profile. So, what does the profile tell you that you might want to investigate further? So, here's the interview questions that you should ask, and again, based on the profile, here's a personal development plan that you could use with this person if you started off with them. Obviously, over time, you'll get to know them very well, and the personality profile is still right, but obviously, you will nuance the sort of plan that you might work up with them for their personal development. But here's something that you can get started with on day one.
Okay. It was very interesting. And you mentioned a few minutes ago that you keep a database of test takers across all these different accounting firms, and you essentially compare for your clients their test taker score to the norm or to the
Yep.
average. And I guess is there any sort of surprising statistics that have come out of that you found?
Um, the bell curve totally applies in people's ability as it does, or their skills as it does with everything else.
Yeah,
So and we get the story all the time. Oh, they're a CPA. I don't need to test them because they're a CPA.
already taken a big test. Yeah,
Wow. Yeah. Well, and at some point in their life, they did take a big test.
yeah,
And but the bell curve applies. Some people who are CPAs are honestly just technically rubbish. And, what's the reason for that? Maybe they've been sidelined in a job where their technical skills haven't been utilized, or so narrowly applied that when you test them on more general things, they just don't have it. Maybe they're a really good test taker.
yeah.
There are a lot of people who can, study extremely hard for a test, go in, nail it, walk out next day, can't remember anything.
Forget it all. Yeah,
Yeah, and that's a real skill, but it's probably not something that you, as an employer, you would particularly value. So yeah, so the bell curve totally applies, and it's as an employer, when you're looking at these candidates, you've got to have something sensible and if you like scientific to compare the candidate to, because otherwise, if you just go, well, here's a raw score, or even sort of just here they are compared to say anyone else who's ever taken this test. Well, how do you know what the quality of that was? Whereas I guess what we're doing is looking at the quality of the people that we're comparing to and making sure that those comparisons um, are good for accounting firms.
yeah. Very interesting. So, can you tell us about a particular client that you've worked with that you've performed tests for? How has working with you and doing tests for them, how has that changed their accounting practice? So we can sort of visualize how this really is impacting the accountant, the firm owners' lives by
Yeah.
utilizing something like this.
So look, there's two or three different ways of looking at this. So one example that we had recently was a firm. They're actually here in New Zealand, and they struggle like everyone else to hire people. They used our test. The candidate completely bombed out in the test, but they hired them anyway because they were desperate. And they sent me an email like two months after the hire, going, "I really should have listened to you guys.
Oh
We hired
no.
this
Yeah.
person. The test said they were no good, and they were no good, and then we had to let them go, and all the costs of bringing them on
Yeah.
and getting them out. So that's one side of it. I guess the flip side of that is we get a lot of anecdotal feedback from and we ask firms this, tell us how how this person who did really well in the test, tell us how they're doing in the role once you hire them.
Mm.
And the feedback you get consistently is the people who are the higher performers in the test, the higher performers in the office. So
Wow.
that's what you're trying to achieve. And look, it's not 100% accuracy at any stage because people are people, and people don't succeed for all sorts of reasons potentially, but you can at least draw a line under that sort of technical,
Yeah.
but or understand the personality bit and what that's likely to look like. But look,
Makes
as
sense.
another example, we did a big piece of work with a firm in Atlanta. So they were looking to do a restructure of their whole CAS team, and they were really struggling about how to get some data around how they were going to make decisions around where people were going to be redeployed. And they came across our testing, and so they used both our personality and skills testing. They used our bookkeeper test, and they used that across the whole team. and using the results of that as a basis, they then re-engineered the way their team worked, from essentially everybody doing everything to having some specific roles around onboarding and offboarding clients, so that the people who were doing the monthly bookkeeping were not being distracted by having to onboard and offboard as well, that they could just get on and do the work for the clients who were being consistent, if you like, and then they had specialists doing this other work. So, we're actually working up a case study with them based on that. But that was a really good experience. They handled it exceptionally well. We were super impressed with the way that they dealt with their team through that, because it's challenging to give people that uncertainty that nobody's jobs were lost in this process, but people get nervous and upset, I guess, when change like that is coming up, and they're being asked to take tests whilst they're still in a role.
Yeah.
So it can be a useful adjunct, I guess, to help with those sorts of processes, and again provide some objective evidence to add to that sort of subjective view of where people are at and what they can potentially do for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you would thoroughly vet software equipment that you would buy for your business. You might as well vet the people that you hire thoroughly as well.
Yeah. Oh, look, and people probably spend a lot longer reviewing the latest part of their tech stack than they do,
right.
Hiring somebody who's going to cost them $75,000 a year.
Yeah.
It's the reality.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, so somebody listening says, I'm interested. Where do they go?
Jump on our website, accounttests.com.
Okay.
And
how do you spell that?
So ACCOUNTESTS.
Okay, so the T is shared.
Only one T in the middle. I know. Okay. We didn't pay our media people enough money to come up with a name that people could spell. So,
all right. Well,
but yeah, on there we people can have a look at a free trial. So we understand that firms may want to have a look at one of these tests before they use them on a candidate. Try them out internally, and you can see the range of tests we've got there. And there'd be 15 or 20 skills tests across the US market.
Perfect. Okay, so we'll put that link, Account Test, in our podcast page for this episode. Giles, thank you so much for being with us today.
Adam, it's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah. So, and to everyone listening or watching, thank you so much for spending the last few minutes with us as we discussed how to escape the accountant's trap. Bye for now.